Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the ADDitude team, I am pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled College Accommodations for Neurodivergent Students. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Jillian Heilman. Dr. Heilman is a disability expert with more than 20 years of experience in education and advocacy. She is the Director of Student Accessibility Services at Connecticut College and trains other colleges and private organizations to better serve individuals with disabilities. Her nonprofit, the Hallie Grace Foundation, helps educate medical professionals, support families, and empower young people with disabilities. Moving on to college is a big transition, and so is the process of applying for accommodations. The IEPs and 504 plans that supported your high school student do not carry over to higher education. Knowing what documentation your teen needs and what services are available can make a huge difference in their academic journey. Today's webinar will serve as a critical resource for parents and students seeking to understand the process of securing disability services. So we would like to begin today's webinar with a poll question to our live audience. We would like to know which accommodations have helped your student so far in their educational journey. We have some selections there. And of course, you can always tell us if we overlooked an accommodation that worked for your child or for your students, if you are an educator. And also, please share your biggest concern regarding the transition from high school to college for your ADHD teen. And again, feel free to add any options we've overlooked. In the meantime, for answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you haven't done so already, be sure to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for ADDitude Magazine for yourself or to share with someone who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Just click on the magazine tab on your screen to learn more. Finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Landmark College. Landmark College exclusively serves students who learn differently, including students with learning disabilities, ADHD, autism, or executive function challenges. The college offers associate and bachelor's degrees, as well as short-term programs on its Putney, Vermont campus, online dual enrollment courses for high school students, and a fully online Associate of Arts in General Studies. Click the link on your screen to visit www.landmark.edu. You can learn more. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Jillian Heilman. Thank you so much for joining us today and leading this discussion.
Thank you very much, Annie. And just to reintroduce myself, my name is Dr. Jillian Heilman. I am, as Annie mentioned, I have been a disability expert for the past 20 years. I've taught college and disability sciences, rehabilitation counseling. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor as well. And I am also a director of disability services at Connecticut College. But for me, on top of all those credentials, my most important credential is that I'm also the mom to 3 children who have varying disabilities and diagnoses. And including in that is I have a freshman going into their freshman year of college, navigating disability services, as well as a child who is going into their senior year of college and navigating disability services. So as I prepared this presentation for you, please know I see this presentation through the lens of which I am a professional, but also for the lens of which that I can appreciate how difficult and challenging it can be as a parent as well. So today we're going to be taking a look at some of the things you want to look for in a college when you have a student who is neurodiverse. And when I talk about neurodiversity, this could include ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, It could be learning disabilities, traumatic brain injuries, anything that allows the brain to process information differently. So in my perspective, disability is not a dirty word. Disability is something to be embraced that can be channeled as a strength in your child. So today we're going to look at what do we look for in a college when we have a child who is neurodivergent. We're also going to take a look at the laws when it comes to disability rights and disability services in high school as compared to college. And then we're going to take a look at student accessibility services. This is called something different at most colleges. It could be disability services, accessibility services, whatever the name of the office at a college. What are their responsibilities? What are their responsibilities to the family and to the student themselves? We're also going to take a look at, once you get to college, what are the students' responsibilities? Because that's the big shift we're going to see, is that students have a big shift in responsibilities. We're also going to look at a big question I get a lot of times is, what is the timeline to apply for accommodation? What types of documentation do I need when applying for accommodations? And what accommodations should we be asking for at the collegiate level? And then finally, we're going to end today with, what is the role of the parent during this transition process? As I said, I'm a parent too, so that's the most important role for me in my life. And I hope we can give you some tips of the trade when working with your students as they prepare to go off to college. When we take a look at colleges, I want you to know this could be 2-year universities, 4-year universities. This could be trade schools. You can have accommodations in trade schools. Students may also choose to work right out of the gate, out of high school, and that's okay too, whatever avenue they pursue. Today, we're just going to look at colleges, whether it be junior college or 2-year college or a 4-year university, but we can apply these in other situations. So when you're taking a look at college, I want you to start thinking about the faculty to student ratio. It's always critical to understand how your child learns and how you learn as an individual if you are the individual with a diagnosis. Smaller class sizes are often more conducive for individuals who have learning disabilities or are on the neurodivergent spectrum. So looking at the class size, would a chemistry class be of 300, or would it be better for the student to be in a class size of 20 to 30? Even in 12 to 15. So some of those smaller colleges, having that class ratio faculty to student is critical. We also call that a high touch college, where the faculty are more engaged with the students, but also the deans are more engaged with the students, the student resource centers. So you also, when starting to visit colleges, and I highly encourage you to visit them in person, make appointments with these different offices to see what resources they have available based on your students' needs. Does the college offer an academic resource center? The college I work at, Connecticut College, we do have an academic resource center. We have learning specialists that are full-time staff that specialize in helping students, especially with executive functioning disorders, really chunk up assignments. They'll meet with them weekly for 30 minutes a week, and they'll chunk up those assignments. They'll look at the syllabus and say, hey, what is it you're working on this week? How can we support you? And they'll give them some time management tips. So that's critical to see if that's something your student needs. This is how we need to, when you're visiting colleges, ask these questions. What does the Academic Resource Center offer? Do they have a writing center that supports writing if your student has issues with writing? Do they have peer tutors? Do they have professional tutors? Those types of resources on campus. And do they charge extra for those services? Most colleges, that's fully included in the tuition, but it's always good to check. One of my primary goals when students and families are visiting colleges, make an appointment with the Student Accessibility Services office. Get a feel for the culture of that office. Get a feel, do they, in addition to student accommodations, do they offer programming efforts? Do they have additional supports, workshops, training seminars, testing centers, those types of things, looking at their culture on that campus? One great way to do this is start with their website when you're looking at colleges. I know our college at Connecticut College, our SAS office also has an Instagram page. Why? Because students don't read the emails from the college. Believe it or not, they will not read the 20 emails they get a day from the college. So we kind of meet them at their level, and we offer programming and notifications through Instagram, as well as posters across campus. These are things you can look when you're visiting that college campus. Look at the size of a campus. This is not just the class size, but the actual size of a campus. I've taught at universities with 45,000 undergraduate, and I've taught at universities with 2,000 undergraduate. A smaller physical campus is easier to maneuver. Do the dorms have laundry services in the dorm? Do the dorms have dining services in the dorm? When you have individuals with issues with executive functioning, these are things you want to think about. How much of that mental energy are they expending on a weekly basis to walk across campus to go to a dining hall? How much do they have to walk across campus to utilize laundry services? We want to make their lives as accessible as possible and take some of that executive functioning power, brain power off their schedule. So seeing about the size of the campus can make a huge impact on someone who has executive functioning issues that they are dealing with. We also want to look at colleges. Do they have the major that interests your student? Really, you want to make sure that that's the primary goal. They're there for an education. So do they have that major? What is the proximity to home? Will your student do better if they're a little bit further away from home so they can't come home every weekend? Or will they do better if they're within an hour's drive? Understand your student and kind of navigate that with your student. I have one of each. I have one who's an hour away and one who will be driving 6 hours away. So you have to know every student is an individual, and each one of your children is going to be unique and have unique needs as well. There are different disability laws and supports on a state-by-state basis. We're going to talk in the next 2 slides about some of the federal laws, but it's important also to consider some of those state laws and if there's any impact on diversity, equity, and inclusion laws within your state and how that may impact disability services. Finally, when you're looking at colleges, I want you to also look at some of the additional services. Counseling centers. We know the #1 secondary condition for most students with a learning disability or being neurodivergent, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, a #1 secondary condition is mental health diagnosis, whether that be anxiety or depression. So know if there's counseling centers on campus and what resources are available to your students. Also look into health services. Are they getting medication management? Are they going to have to see a neuropsychiatrist to get their controlled substance on campus? So knowing if there's a pharmacy on campus, do you have a dorm safe to keep that medication safe is really critical. And then we also know that students who are neurodivergent may also have issues with interacting socially. So what clubs, what sports, what activities are on campus that they can get engaged in, and how do they reach those students who need that extra support? So many colleges have a lot of this information online, but it's critical that you also visit those campuses to kind of find out what's available to you and if your student is interested in that campus. The next couple slides, as I said, is going to break down a little bit of the difference between high school versus college. In high school, our students are covered under several laws. The first of which is IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act that was instituted in 1990, earlier under a different name. That act, the IDEA, states that all students are entitled to a free, appropriate public education and cannot be discriminated against. They're protected also under the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Section 504. But the primary one for high school is that they get that free appropriate education, which is under the IDEA Act. Now, when our student goes to college, there's a shift. They're still covered under the ADA, and they're also covered under the Rehabilitation Act of 504. But the IDEA Act ends when a student graduates high school. College, under the ADA and 504, ensures that qualified persons with a disability will not be discriminated against and have full access to academic programs and services on campus. But the student who is diagnosed with a disability has to meet the education guidelines to get into that college. Even if it's with accommodations, that's fine. They still have to meet specific criteria. This is why I say students with disability are some of the strongest students we see in colleges, because they're meeting the same basic requirements to get into a college, but sometimes they have to work 10 times harder to get to that point. but they got into that college. So we should be so proud of our students, whether it's a junior college or four-year college, if they get into that college, because they're meeting above and beyond with a diagnosed disability. When we look at high school and college and the differences, high school is covered from 3 years old till high school graduates. Again, college is anyone with a diagnosed disability that meets the basic requirements to enter that college. With high school, education is considered a right. It's a fundamental right of the individual. In college, education is considered an opportunity. Students must meet those admissions criteria and be otherwise qualified. Again, they can utilize accommodations for the SAT, ACT, as well as in their classroom, but students must meet the basic criteria. They also must follow and meet the criteria for the college, such as honor code, course objectives. We cannot alter the fundamental curriculum. We can't make fundamental alterations to programs or curriculum. So it's like a job. What are the essential job functions? In college, we look at what are the essential learning objectives for the course. A student must meet those essential learning objectives with or without those accommodations that we can provide to them. That's where we see a big difference from being a right of education to an opportunity for education from high school to college. A couple other differences when we look at high school to college. When we look at high school, the school itself is responsible for identifying the students with disabilities, as well as paying for any testing and assessments and managing their plan. In college, here's the big difference. That 504 plan does not automatically transfer over to the college level. In college, the student must self-identify his or her disability. And a student is 18 years old, they are an adult. And unless you've signed the FERPA, which is a release of information, and your student agrees to have you release of information and have conversation with the school, it is the student's responsibility to self-identify his or her disability with the Disability Services Office. This can be done, and we're going to talk about a timeline in a minute, but it can be done as soon as they accept their admission into that college. In college, the student must also pay for and provide any appropriate documentation. That documentation can be something that the high school did the testing, that's fine. It can also be the high school's 504 plan, that's fine. But it is the student who has to provide that documentation to the college. Any additional testing or for diagnosis must be paid for the student after the student graduates from high school. Again, you'll ask about documentation. Every college is going to be different about what type of documentation they accept. If it's a neuropsychological, most colleges accept if it's 1 to 3 years of age. It's important when you visit colleges that these are the questions you ask. What is the age of the documentation you need if it's an educational or a neuropsychological evaluation? 504, I always like to see a 504 from what they used in high school so I can see what accommodations worked for your student in high school, because a lot of times we can give those same accommodations in college. However, if a student is newly diagnosed or has never received services in high school, they are still eligible for services in college. Again, they just have to self-identify and pay for and provide that documentation that shows they have a diagnosed disability. Couple other things I just want to highlight with you, the difference between high school and college, because I get this question a lot of times. In high school, schools develop and monitor the plan and have to communicate that plan to parents and students. At the college level, plans are developed as an integrative process between the Student Accessibility Service Office and the college student. The two of them work together and collaborate on what the plan will look like. And the student is considered an adult and their privacy and confidentiality protections are in place. So it's critical that your student communicate with that Student Accessibility Services Office. Colleges offer tons of resources for the students, academic resources, writing centers, in addition to the accommodations we offer through the SAS office. but a student must seek out those services on their own. We will not be responsible for emailing them saying, have you met with your disability coordinator? Have you met with your academic resource center? The students are adults and have to be engaged in the process. If you don't think your student's ready yet, that's okay too. Take a gap year. Some parents, I recommend having the student stay living at home while they prepare for college. Take 2 junior college classes, get a job, and live at home where they start doing their laundry on their own before they take the initiative to a 4-year university. Both plans, whether you go straight to a 4-year university or not, are deemed successful. There's no right or wrong path when you're getting an education. You have to look at what your student capabilities are and what their motivation and drive is, because they have to want to be part of this process. In addition to academic accommodations, we can also provide testing accommodations and housing and dining accommodations. So the students have to ask the college about all those accommodations when they go into the meetings. In high school, schools communicate with parents regularly. In college, we are not permitted to contact parents without the student's permission. And at colleges, most colleges have a form that students can sign off to release that information to the parents. And finally, the accommodation arrangement in high school. You may typically hear in high school of an IEP or a 504 plan. That is the typical plans we have. For high school. However, in college, reasonable accommodations are provided through the Student Accessibility Services Office. And we have accommodations are communicated every semester. Students have to request what we call faculty notification letters. And those faculty notification letters are then sent out to their instructor for that semester. But it's the student's responsibility every semester to request those letters be sent out. Trust me, I have one kid who sends it out regularly. I'm nervous as can be about my upcoming freshmen, whether they will remember to request those faculty notification letters. And sometimes they may forget. And that's part of the learning process. That's part of growing up and going to college. But all they have to do is forget it once and not have their accommodations in place, and they'll learn to start requesting them every semester, I found. And it also, we highly encourage students to meet with their professor at the beginning of the semester to talk about how those accommodations look for them. Please let me explain this as well. Students should never have to tell anyone what their diagnosis is except the disability director. Their professors do not need to know they're on the autism spectrum. They do not need to know they're ADHD. They will get a letter saying this student is registered with the Accessibility Services Office, and these are the accommodations that they received this semester. Then the student talks about what those accommodations will look like in that classroom. And if a student ever has a professor who gives them a hard time, that's what the disability director is there for. 99 times out of 100, professors are phenomenal at working with students with disabilities. But you have resources on every campus, and that's your accessibility services that the student can go back and ask for help if they're not getting their accommodations met. All right. So what are some of the responsibilities of the Student Accessibility Services Office? There's a number of offices and responsibilities. These are some of the more generic. These are ones that I hold to as running my own office. It may look a little different for each office, but it's important that you get an overview of what the SAS office will provide you and your student while they're at college. It's our job at college to assess students' requests for accommodations using current disability documentation. Some of this may be medical documentation on a medical diagnosis. Some may be a neuropsychological, including an IQ test. It may be Beck's depression inventory, whatever it might be. We have to be able to interpret that information effectively. We also provide information regarding policies, procedures, rights, and responsibilities. And all SAS programs should have a grievance procedure. So if a student ever feels like they're not getting their rights met, there is a formal college grievance policy that your student can follow, and you can advocate with them. We do have advocates on every campus, typically through the Title IX office and the ADA coordinator on office. We also recommend appropriate learning and testing accommodations and assess for potential housing accommodations. I have a number of students who come to me for academic accommodations, and their diagnosis is ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. They may not even request a housing accommodation, but I may make a recommendation for a housing accommodation. So be prepared that they may offer you more accommodations than your student's asking for. You have the right, and your student has the right, to say no to accommodations that they don't feel will be a good fit for them. For example, I had a student come in and has trouble with executive functioning. And I asked them if they would feel, we talked about how much planning comes, going to 3 meals a day, going to different, one day they have 7 hours of class, one day they have 3 hours of class, then they have to do laundry. So I offered them the housing accommodation of having a dorm with laundry service and having a dorm with easy access to dining. They never even thought of that, but it took a weight off their shoulders of knowing that's one less thing they have to worry about. These are things that the SAS office should be offering you and considering when they go over your intake with your student. SAS is also responsible for providing reasonable and appropriate accommodations, academic adjustments, assistive technology, anything we can do to support your student to meet their college criteria for eligibility. So we want to make sure that they're successful in the classroom. If they have trouble note taking, there may be computer apps that we can use that can transcribe the lecture notes. There may be smart pens, which are a new technology where it can, as the student's writing, it has a camera in one end and a microphone in the other of the pen, and it records what the student's writing, but also records what the professor's saying at the same time, so they can go back and listen to a lecture. There's so many aids and resources that we offer at the collegiate level. Most students are surprised at how different it is from high school. The SAS office also offers and ensures strict confidentiality, because we know we're dealing with private, personal information on the student's background, whether it's their education or medical needs. We make sure that that information is confidential at all times. And we also assist students in communicating with faculty about disabilities and required accommodations. Some of those, maybe we have a pre-orientation at our program, and we are going to meet with students and have mock meetings, pretending to talk to faculty members to kind of get some of those nervous energies out. A lot of SAS offices offer those additional supports to help them communicate more effectively with their faculty. Again, these are great things to talk about and ask about when you're interviewing different colleges. The key is for you to find a great fit for your student, academically as well as personally and professionally. Students at the collegiate level have huge responsibilities too. They must self-identify with the Disability Services Office, provide updated accommodations. They gotta let faculty know that they're requesting faculty notification letters, meeting with the faculty at the beginning of every semester. That first semester is usually the hardest because they're nervous. But trust me, they're going to become some of the most independent college students you'll see. And they're going to be more confident in jobs because they've learned to talk to adults to advocate for themselves. I like students to do this because they're finding their own voice. They're finding their identity as an individual with a disability, and they're learning to self-advocate for themselves. The skills they're learning that first semester of college are going to stick with them when they go into working environments beyond college. So these are some great things you're going to see. Having a disability is not a deficit. Having a disability is truly a strength when we look at students in college. So what are some of the timelines for applying for accommodations? As soon as you put the down payment for the college, it's time to start reaching out to the SAS office. Identify what paperwork you need to apply for SAS accommodations. Have your student make an appointment with their provider, whether that's a psychologist, psychiatrist, medical physician, and have them start advocating for themselves to fill out that paperwork with their provider. Then you'll typically submit that paperwork through the college portal. Some colleges still do paper copies. That's fine. Most do online portals at this time. Once that paperwork is uploaded in their portal, the accessibility team will evaluate the paperwork and request a meeting with the student. These are typically done virtually over the summer or during the first 2 weeks of classes. And the SAS office will do the intake with the student at that time to go over academic, housing, and other accommodations. I highly recommend you let them advocate for themselves during that meeting. If your student allows you, participate with them, but let them take the lead during those meetings. You also want to register for any pre-orientation programs that are offered through your school. At our school, it's called the Helix program. Every college may be different. Usually housing deadlines for housing accommodations are mid-June. I recommend as soon as you know you're going to that college, reach out to the housing office. The sooner the better. And usually the deadline for academic accommodations for most colleges is August 1st, but no, that may vary from college to college. All right, some of the documentation that people are asking about are typically, most colleges have forms, whether it be, we have an ADHD form, we have a medical diagnosis, and multiple other main forms. But any documentation from your provider that's typewritten on their business letterhead with their professional credentials and signature is fine. The key is with that documentation, you want to include the diagnosis of the individual, including any information of testing or assessment tools. Standard test scores like in a neuropsych or neuroeducational really helps us to know, like if they have a processing speed, it'll tell me what kind of accommodations to offer. If there's any other medical diagnoses, that is important to have. If they're on medications, anything like that, that will help us to manage. In addition, we want to know how their diagnosis impacts them academically, as well as socially, emotionally, and in housing. So what major life activities are limited, and clearly stating what the severity, frequency, and pervasiveness of the condition so that we can better understand the diagnosis and how we can provide relevant accommodations. Now let's take a look at a couple different types of accommodations. I'm going to review just a few today. This is nowhere near as an exhaustive list. We probably have 100 accommodations that I can pull from for my students. But I'm just going to kind of go over some of the more common ones when it comes to students who are neurodivergent. I do want you to know that there should never be a cookie cutter approach to disability services. Every student with a diagnosis is an individual and should be treated as an individual. How one student presents themselves on the autism spectrum with ASD1, it may be extremely different than another student who has the exact same diagnosis. So you want to make sure that the Disability Services Office really looks at your student as an individual, ask them questions about who they are, their interests, and making sure that they really look at them individually when they go over some of these accommodations. Common accommodations, especially with individuals with working memory, processing speed, we offer extra time on testing and testing in a distraction-reduced environment. Those are some of our most often used. With working memory, we may also offer formula sheets for math or a four-function calculator. Knowing that you can't have trouble memorizing some of those simple functions, you know how to do them, but it takes extra time. So if we can give you those formula sheets and they don't compromise the integrity of the course, if that's not part of the core course curriculum to memorize those equations, then we can absolutely offer that as an accommodation. Smart pens, ability to record lecture, priority registration is a big one, especially for individuals with processing speed. It can be very anxiety provoking. And when you already have trouble processing information quickly, these are things that we can offer. Breaks during testing, text-to-speech software, earplugs or headphones during testing to break out background noise. Reduced course load, being a part-time student is huge. And still get full credit. So taking 12 credits instead of 16 can be a big accommodation. Housing accommodations, I touched on some of these, but a couple more: no more than one roommate, dorm near dining or dorm centrally located, maybe quiet housing. And under the Fair Housing Act, students are also eligible for an emotional support animal. And I've seen this be a huge issue for students with a lot of anxiety and depression. Having that animal to care for helps them get out of bed and keep them motivated. So it's definitely something to consider. I only have like 2 more minutes, so I want to make sure I end on a positive note for parents. What is the parent's role in transitioning to college? one of the things when I talk about do's and don'ts, one of the things you can do is let your child take the lead. You can absolutely offer to help them prepare for the intake, asking questions, but let them be the guide. Let them be the one who leads the conversation. In my case, my youngest is going off to University of Maine in the fall and told me to shut my mouth and not say a word and sit on my hands because I talk with my hands. And I went in the office and I told the director, I can't say anything until you tell me it's okay to talk. And they asked some of the best questions, my upcoming freshmen, questions I hadn't even thought to ask for. So your student may surprise you in some of the things they may ask, but after they're done asking, absolutely, mom and dad can jump in if they invite you to the interview process. Do contact the SAS office, but do that through your student's email. You know, if you're going to work with your students, say, hey, I think this question is important for you to ask the SAS office. How about we draft an email together through your email? Why do we do that? Because the student is going to get the response before you get the response. Then it comes through their office, and you're modeling good behavior and teaching them to advocate for themselves. Then they already know, they're learning with you. They already know how to email the SAS office because you worked with them through their email account. Here's a big one I always want to say with parents is focus on the child holistically, especially during that freshman year. Don't focus just on grades. Is your child are they washing their clothes once a week? Are they calling you or texting you once a week saying they're doing okay? Are they eating meals? When you see them over Thanksgiving break, do their clothes smell? If they don't, they're doing great. They're actually doing laundry. If they haven't lost weight, they're eating food. Focus on that independence that they're accomplishing, not just their academics. At least that first semester, give them some cushion to explore, to stumble and fall and fail, and to pick themselves up and succeed. You can be there as their safe place. That is one of the things you can do is be their safe place. It's not going to be easy. They're going to have a few extra hurdles than most people, but you're the one who says, I believe in you. You can do this. You have the skills capable to being successful in college. And help them prepare now for college. Are they doing their own laundry? I had my kids doing their laundry by 8th grade. By high school, my kids have to cook one meal a day. I don't care if it's Chef I can't even say it. If it's SpaghettiOs out of a can, that's fine. But if they're responsible for turning on the stove and cooking one meal or microwaving a dinner, they're learning independence. Even if your child's going off to college this fall, have them start doing laundry, have them start making their own lunch. Work on some of those coping strategies when they do get stressed out. Work on time management. Are they aware of their medication management? Do they get up and take their medicine on their own? Those types of things you can do to start preparing some of those executive functioning skills that they'll be better prepared for college. On the don'ts end, don't call the SAS office on a daily basis. Your student is doing great. We'll reach out if we think they're having a tough time. Call if you're very concerned about them. Absolutely. I take calls all the time, but make sure that you check in with your student. If they say they're doing good or they're eating alone for lunch, don't worry about it. They're probably doing good, and it's okay to eat alone. They'll make friends, I promise. Don't ask questions that are asked to your child. If the director's asking your student a question, let them answer first. And then if you have additional information, absolutely add after that, but let your child answer first. I get being a parent can be the hardest thing. We've taken care of them and know them inside and out for the past 18 years. But part of being a parent is also letting them be successful as an adult. So letting them have a little bit of that independence, but also filling in where they may have missed a few things is okay too. And one of the last note I want to say is don't ask for services and supports until your student is ready. Some of them come to college and they don't want anything to do with disability services. And that's okay too. They can meet with me. They can meet with your director at your college. They can know that that service is there for them when they're ready. And usually after midterms, they're ready and they'll come seek out those services. We can implement them at any time during the semester. I've run over a couple minutes, but I do want to put it back over to the moderator so she can ask a few questions that you may have asked during this session.
Yes, Dr. Heilman, thank you so much. That was chock full of great information. We do have a lot of questions. Before we launch into it, I would like to quickly thank Landmark College once more for sponsoring this webinar. And I would like to share the results from today's poll question. We started out by asking you two things, and I'm going to flip the order here because I think it makes it more interesting. So the second question was your biggest concern about the transition from high school to college. And you said the top results were fairly tight and they're all related to executive function. Managing time effectively was number one. Keeping up with workload, number two. Planning and prioritizing critical work. And then, interestingly, self-advocacy and independence and managing the accommodations application process. So that leads nicely into the other question, which was which accommodations have worked the best for your student to date? And I'll just name some of the top results here. With a bullet was extended time on tests. That was number one, 19% of people said that. And then alternative test location, extended deadlines, breaking down assignments into smaller parts, and getting copies of the teacher's notes. So almost universally sort of addressing the executive function challenges that were sort of noted in the other question. So that is all good background information and will help steer some of these questions as we launch in. But I wanted to start because we have a fair number of parents listening of high school students. And they are very interested in knowing if there is there any requirement, advantage, disadvantage to disclosing disability in the application process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually get that a lot. There's no positive or negative to disclose. A lot of families will ask, there's really not, most forms do not, most college applications don't have a disclosure because they're not supposed to be asking about disability. Some students may talk about their disability in their essay portion of their application. If that essay is something that is important and you're passionate about and really is critical to who you are as an individual, so when they read their essay, they're going to learn about you, then absolutely write about it. You're not going to be discriminated against. Colleges have protocol they have to adhere to. But no, there's no positive or negative, I don't think, to disclose ahead of time. As soon as you do get accepted to college, it is up to you it is up to your student if they want to disclose at that time. And that does have a benefit to disclose because they get a number of academic supports through disclosure.
And you mentioned that your office, for example, may start with even some summer seminars and some outreach even before the academic year starts. So really ASAP.
It's critical to reach out to that accessibility service office as soon as you put the deposit down on the college, and even start visiting those offices. Anytime you're visiting a college itself, go ahead and make an appointment to stop in. We're used to that as directors. We welcome it. We look forward to new families coming by because we want to make sure that your student is finding the right fit for college for them. And if they have a disability, then this is part of the big fit, is whether our office is going to fit with their needs.
And that is a great segue into another big question we received, which are there any questions that prospective students might ask representatives from the SAS office to assess the level of support, but also, that fit of support?
Yeah, I kind of like scenario questions like you do in an interview. So I had both of my kids who are in college, I had them ask the director of disability services, if I have a professor who gives me a hard time about providing an accommodation or embarrasses me, how would your office handle that? So you kind of get an idea of the level of support they'll provide and their attitude towards individuals who won't provide those services. And usually you get some good stories out of that as well. So some situational questions are great to ask. I always look for online presence. And if they want to meet another student through their office, we've had someone with very specific diagnoses ask, do you have any other students on campus? I knew I did. I reached out to that student and said, hey, would you be open to meeting a student and allowing me to introduce you and you disclose your disability? Absolutely, they did. And they had a great rapport and got to meet somebody else like them on campus. So those are some good questions to ask. Meeting other students affiliated with the office. Also taking a tour of the office. What do the testing centers look like? That kind of thing.
Very helpful. I love the scenario questions are gold. This is also kind of a brass tacks question. Is there any legal difference between public and private universities and their requirements to provide support?
That's a great question. And the answer is no. Students going to both public and private programs, colleges are covered under the ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. The reason being, private colleges have students who receive federal funding. So they're getting federal grants, federal loans to be able to attend that private university. So because the college is accepting federal funding through grants and loans that students are having to attend that college, doesn't have to be your college, your student receiving that grant, but the college itself is receiving federal dollars. So they still have to be ADA compliant in all things.
So helpful. Thank you. And you mentioned that it's the Section 504 that is applicable. Now, if a high school student currently has an IEP, should they consider transitioning to a 504 plan in order to make this transition to college more smooth, or the accommodations that they're receiving under the IEP would still be helpful in guiding disability support services?
An IEP is actually a more detailed plan than a 504. So a 504 is one of our more basic rights and responsibilities and goals, but more thorough. It's based on the level of diagnosis in the public education system is whether they have an IEP or a 504. A lot of students under other health impaired fall under 504, while individuals who have full neuropsychologicals with a learning disability may have a full scale IEP. So both are equivalent to us in disability services because it will give us the accommodations and goals that that student had in high school. So both are equivalent.
Okay. So those people who are asking about whether they need to change, the answer is no.
No. IEPs and are covered under the Rehabilitation Act of 504. The 504 in a high school is just named in honor of that act, so you don't need it to go over. And it should be noted too, I did have a student this year who thought their IEP in 504 was automatically transferred from their school, from their private school. It is not transferred necessarily. You have to register with our office and request that information get emailed to us. So it is all about the student self-disclosing.
Okay. And so you touched on just now the student self-disclosing. Number of people saying it is clear from this presentation that this is a very student-led process for legal reasons. And as we know from our poll, executive function is the number one challenge. So you can see where I'm going with this.
Yes.
Is it possible? So one question along this lines, is it possible to have an accommodation that actually sets a student up with a guidance counselor or a mentor or someone to help them keep on top of this process?
Okay, so this is where it's critical to do your research into what college is the best fit for your student. So, for example, some of the smaller colleges like Landmark College, we actually refer some students to Landmark. It's a phenomenal college. Connecticut College as well. We're very small colleges and we're high touch. I mentioned this a little earlier. So having a class dean, we have class deans and a lot of colleges have this, but looking into it, When you have a small college where the undergraduate enrollment's 2,000 to 5,000, it's like some public high schools. So there's more engagement. At our college, if a professor notices someone's not attending class, they'll reach out to the class dean. The class dean will reach out to me. Are they registered with your office? Can we further support them? These are things that you want to ask when you're researching colleges. In addition, asking the colleges, do you have anything to support executive functioning? So at our school, it's the Academic Resource Center, the learning specialists. All they do is really support students with those executive functioning needs. They ask the student to set up for a 1-hour appointment once a week. And sometimes it's 2 or 3 times a week, depending on the level of executive functioning. And really checking in with them like that guidance counselor you would have in high school, and checking in with them. So really looking at what programming efforts address executive functioning, looking at what colleges do to support students with executive functioning are critical. So finding that best fit, and some of these smaller colleges may be that best fit for your student. Bigger colleges offer it too. You just have to ask the right people the right questions. Again, that would be a great question for your accessibility services office. As a quick example, we have I think I said this earlier. Oh, I don't know if I did or not, but we have a workshop at our college that I developed with one of our ARC members. It's called What the F. It gets the student excited because it sounds funny, but it's what the EF, what the executive function. We do a big workshop leading up to midterms, a big workshop leading up to finals. And we have calendar out the whole week leading up to finals, and we help them schedule out hour by hour of their day. When are you going to write your film paper? What hours of the day are you going to study for your calc test? When are you going to go to bed, like get sleep in? When are you going to eat your meals? To really help them plan out during those stressful times, because we know during stress, a lot of that executive functioning falls down. So ask colleges what they do to support some of those executive functioning skills.
I absolutely love that idea for the workshop. And boy.
But again, it's how many students want to utilize the service. We offer it, and we get about 10 to 15 students. And ADHD is our #1 diagnosis on this campus, of about 250 students out of 2,000. And we have about 10 to 15 show up. So students, we can lead them to water, but we can't make them drink. I hate to use an old saying. We really want them to want to help themselves. That's why Disability Services is trying to make it cool to be part of our office. We want you to feel there's no embarrassment to be affiliated with us. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to break down some of those social stigmas associated with having a diagnosis too.
And that leads just wonderfully into another big question, which was, as you know, and as we all know, ADHD unfortunately still carries shame and stigma. And sometimes our students, exactly as you said, refuse or shy away from using the services. Can you offer any advice to parents who are, sort of beating their head against the wall, want the very best for their kids and can't get over this hurdle?
Yeah, I would, if you're sending your kid off to college and they are saying, look, I do not want to do this, don't over pressure them to be registered for disability services at your college, because they won't even access the services if they're not really behind it. What I recommend is saying, hey, look, I hear you. You don't want to register. That's fine. But when we move you in, I'd like us as a parent and you make an appointment with the director of student accessibility during that first week. Just meet them so you know that that's a safe place and they're there if at any time you need those resources. And just give the office a heads up. Say, hey, I'd love to make an appointment. My student's really not into this right now. Could you just let them know you're there? And so they know where the office is. They know how to register for services. And usually after the first round of tests, we do see a lot of students come in and utilize those services. The other thing I do at my college is we really try to embrace disability services. We're starting a campaign this fall about disability is not a dirty word, and it's something to be embracing. We're going to have student athletes share their stories. We're going to have student a cappella. Like, you could be in any major and have a diagnosis, and there's nothing to be embarrassed of. So that's why I said you really need to look at the culture of the college when it comes to disability services, because you want a culture that really embraces disability and diversity on campus.
I love that campaign. What a great idea of sort of highlighting the people in the community who are shining in their own way. Okay, a lot of people here. This is a sort of similar topic here. We parents are quite good at, or have become good at scaffolding and providing our children with everything that they need to succeed. And so some people writing in to say their high school junior or senior doesn't seem to understand how much life is going to change when they leave home, and they don't necessarily recognize yet that they may need services. So is it similar that we have to let them take the wheel in this way?
Yes. This is a hard one. And this is a hard pill to swallow, because I myself as a mom have one child who has embraced everything college and structure and routine, and one who has not embraced it yet. So we're doing everything we can, crash course the summer before freshman year. We've been doing things to build them up in independence, but it's important for them that we stop making them breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Let them get up and make their breakfast, lunch, and dinner. If you want to try for a week, give them grocery money and say you're responsible for buy your own food this week. And let them cook a meal for the family. Let them go to the pharmacy to pick up their medication. Start giving them some of those things that they need to be responsible of, and see they start registering, oh, I got to do my own laundry. Yes, it can't sit in the basket, like fold it and put it away. Those simple tasks, and I say this from personal experiences, just giving them some of those opportunities at home where they're going to start realizing how overwhelming it is. And it just saying, hey, look, if you're not successful, and I've had the tough conversation with my youngest, if you do not do well first semester, you're coming home and going to junior college. Like, I'm giving you a year. I said semester, I meant a year. I'm giving them a year to see how well, making sure they maintain their grades and that independence of balancing everything else. So it's hard to grow up, and they are going to make some mistakes. But again, don't focus too much on the GPA. Try and stay out of academic probation, but really looking at their ability to manage everything all together as a big picture that first semester.
Okay, that's a good pep talk for the parents here.
It's a hard one, trust me. I've been crying at night to my husband, so I get it. I know how hard this can be. But.
Yes. I do need to get to this question. What to do if your requests for accommodations are denied?
Absolutely. Every college has a grievance procedure. It should be on their SAS website or in their resources. And there's a formal process that you can go through in your accommodations to file a grievance if you don't agree with their decision. Then that is reviewed by usually your ADA coordinator, or usually it's ADA coordinator, Title IX director is the same person on campus, on most campuses, and they're an attorney, and they'll go through the process and assign you an advocate at that point. So we do have a formal procedure for every college.
Okay. And you mentioned this earlier, but a couple of people missed it. You mentioned a form that a student could fill out in order to permit their parents to participate in the process, a release form?
Yeah, you'll learn about this as your kids go to college. It's FERPA. So let me pull it up, see if I can find it for you guys. But with FERPA, it's allowing, it is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. It's basically a law that governs the access of educational information and records by public entities such as employers and so forth. So it's who's protected, students' rights are protected under FERPA. And then there's releases that you can sign to allow parents to have access to that information. In our online portal at our college, we have a place where students can sign that FERPA release saying, I give my parents permission for you to talk to them about my academics and my accommodations. If that's not signed, I cannot speak to the parents. By law, I cannot speak to the parents.
Okay. So piggybacking on the question about if your child does have accommodations denied or runs into general bad experience, that they do need to submit that FERPA if they need your support. they need to.
100%. And they
Yeah.
should have, the college should also provide them an advocate through the ADA coordinator if they didn't get their accommodations. So,
Okay.
but yeah, those are great questions. It's a lot of growing up for a young person, and it's a lot of growing up for us as parents. But I'm telling you, these are the students, I call them superheroes. They're the ones who are going to be the most successful in employment because they are learning to advocate for themselves at a young age. Some students have already been attending their IEP meetings with their parents and talking to their teachers about their accommodations. Most high school students don't have this exposure, and you're learning life skills in self-advocacy, in communication, and it's huge life skills that looking at this as a positive as opposed to a negative is phenomenal. We're just making them grow up a little faster than most people.
But they're tough, so they can
They can do it. They have you as their safe place. You're the one that they can go to when they get overwhelmed or have questions, and that's what we're here as parents. We're going to guide them through this process.
Wonderful. Well, that is a lovely high note on which to end this very informative and useful webinar. Dr. Heilman, thank you so much for joining us today and for contributing all of this invaluable information to our ADHD community.
Thank you very much.
We also want to thank everyone who listened and submitted questions today. A number of you asked about a replay to perhaps share with a partner or with your child. You will get the replay link as well as resources in an email very soon. You can also search our site for podcast 513. And if you're listening to this webinar as a podcast, you can click on the episode description and get more resources around accommodations in school. Our podcast is the ADHD Experts podcast, and it's available on all streaming platforms. We also hope you will join us for another free webinar. Next week will be on workplace strategies for professionals with ADHD. If you want to make sure you don't miss any future webinars, articles, research updates, just sign up at attitudemag.com/newsletters, and you will get all that information delivered to you. For now, Dr. Heilman, thank you again for today's webinar, and thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you.